There are nights when I lie still, listening to the wind slip through the window, and I wonder, when does a family begin to fall apart? Some questions in life aren't meant to be answered. They exist to force us to face ourselves. I used to believe that love could heal everything, that with enough patience and sacrifice, a woman could hold a family together, even when the cracks had spread into the deepest silence. I used to think I was strong, until the day the man I loved most quietly walked out of my life without a single goodbye. And that's when I realized some losses don't begin with an explosion, but with a long, aching silence where two people look at each other and see nothing anymore. This is my story, a mother, a fiancé, and a woman who once believed that love was enough. If you've ever loved until you were empty, believed until it blinded you, or held on so tightly that you lost yourself, then stay for a while with whispers of home, where weary hearts can finally slow down and remember how to listen to their own. My name is Chloe. I'm 26 years old, and once, at a certain point in my life, I truly believed I had found happiness. My wedding dress was still hanging in the closet, pure white, light as a breath on a May morning. The honeymoon was booked. I had already imagined the quiet mornings on a secluded beach, where we'd walk hand in hand on soft sand and laugh because, in that moment, there was nothing more we needed. I also had a little girl, Lizzie, my sweet angel who called me Mama in her baby voice, melting my heart every time she smiled. Lizzie was my whole world. And Christian, the man I was about to marry, the man who came into my life not like a spark, but like a quiet promise. He wasn't fireworks. He was like the kitchen light late at night, soft, steady, and enough to make me feel safe. He was the one I thought I'd walk through life with. I believed in that with everything left of me, after all the heartbreaks I'd endured. Christian wasn't like the other men I had known. He was meticulous, thoughtful, sometimes to the point of overthinking. He could spend nearly half an hour just choosing a box of pasta at the grocery store. I used to think his pickiness was endearing, a quirk that made him different. It reassured me. It made me believe a man like that won't make reckless decisions. He's someone I can lean on, a partner, a father figure for my daughter. But what people didn't see, what even I failed to notice at first, was that beneath that calm, grounded exterior, things were slowly cracking. And me, caught in the chaos of being a mother and a fiancé, didn't realize those cracks were growing wider with every passing day. Christian began asking about the time I was pregnant with Lizzie, not with soft curiosity, but with strangely specific questions. When exactly did you find out you were pregnant? Were you still working your old job then? Do you remember where you were and who you were with around that time? I was confused, not because I was hiding something, but because how could I possibly remember every exact moment from 2 years ago? Back then, I was trying to stay afloat. I had so much on my plate, trying to care for the life growing inside me, trying to rebuild after everything had fallen apart. I didn't record every timestamp like it was an investigation. I was simply trying to survive. But the way he looked at me, his own fiancé, felt like he believed I was keeping something from him. At first, I thought maybe it was just wedding nerves. Everyone has their moments of doubt. But when the questions didn't stop, when silence replaced conversation, I started to understand something was shifting inside him. Christian used to be so attentive. He'd always ask where I was, who I saw. Sometimes it felt a bit much, but I'd convinced myself that was just his way of loving. Now, That same man was pulling away, coming home late, quiet during dinner, no longer asking how my day was. And when I finally asked him, he said I was being controlling. The irony of it was almost laughable. When he wanted to know where I was, I had to answer the phone within the first few rings. But when I asked why he disappeared for hours, one vague excuse about work, and suddenly I was too sensitive. I started to doubt, to feel this constant unease. And yes, I checked his phone. I'm not proud of it, but when you love someone deeply, your heart sometimes drowns out your judgment. I just needed to know if something or someone was pulling him away. But there was nothing. No signs of cheating, no evidence of betrayal. And somehow, that only made it worse. I was lost in a fog of suspicion, without anything solid to hold on to. I told my best friend, Jessa. She said maybe Christian was just anxious about the wedding. Men get weird before the big day, she shrugged. I wanted to believe that, but that heavy feeling, that quiet fear, it wouldn't leave me. It felt like he was slowly slipping away from me and my daughter. Still, I held on, because I believed if I loved enough, if I tried hard enough, love could keep us together. Christian was still my safe place in this chaotic world. At least, that's what I kept telling myself. Looking back now, I realize Christian had probably been preparing for something all along. It's just that I, somehow, chose not to see it. There are signs that, if you're on the outside looking in, you would probably catch. But when you're living inside it, inside love, inside the hope of keeping your home intact, you keep telling yourself, it's probably nothing. Christian started asking questions about my old job, the one I had left long ago. He wanted to know if I still kept in touch with anyone there. Seemingly harmless questions, but they came again and again, always in the same flat tone. And with each one, a strange heaviness settled on me. Then there were those moments, subtle, fleeting, when someone would comment, "Lizzie looks so much like you. She doesn't resemble Christian at all." And I'd catch a flicker in his eyes, a brief shadow crossing his face, hesitation, hurt, and something I didn't want to name, doubt. In those moments, I would turn away. I didn't want to see it, didn't want to feel it. I'm someone who has always known how to compartmentalize my emotions. When life got too overwhelming, I focused on the present, what needed to be done, what was right in front of me. The rest, I set aside to survive. That instinct had carried me through my early 20s, through an unexpected pregnancy, through heartaches that could have broken me. To me, it wasn't lying, it was survival. But Christian, he didn't see it that way. To him, my silence was omission. Omission was deception, and deception was reason enough to doubt everything. Even as he began to pull away, I kept believing it was temporary. Men go through rough patches too, don't they? Maybe it was stress from work, maybe the weight of an upcoming wedding, maybe the daunting reality of becoming a father. They would pass. He would come back to me. I believed that. I didn't want his momentary confusion to destroy everything we had built together. We still had a wedding to plan, a child who was growing every day, a life I had worked so hard to piece together from nothing. But what I didn't see, what I grossly underestimated, was how deep his insecurity had burrowed. I had no idea that the man I loved most, the one I trusted with everything, had spent months quietly preparing for something I never would have imagined. And when the truth finally surfaced, it didn't just shake me. It unraveled my entire life, forever. The day everything fell apart began, like any other Tuesday. I was rushing around the living room, trying to find a pair of matching socks for Lizzie, a task that should have been simple, but somehow my house always ended up with only one sock from each pair. Children really do have a way of turning the smallest things into chaos. Christian was in the kitchen, making coffee, like every morning. But that day, there were no jokes about work, no familiar furrow of his brow as he thought about meetings, not even the usual, "Do you want some too?" Just silence. His eyes were fixed on his phone, wearing an expression I'd never seen before. Then he spoke, softly, but the words cut through the quiet like a knife. "We need to talk. Tonight, when you get home." He didn't look at me, gave no explanation, no hint as to what he meant, and before I could even ask, he set his coffee cup down, gave me a quick, detached kiss goodbye, like his mind was already somewhere far away. I couldn't focus the entire day. I sat at work, pretending to read emails, pretending to edit documents, while my head spun with questions. Was he going to call off the wedding? Was he having doubts about marrying me? Was it money? Was he feeling overwhelmed? I texted him a few times throughout the day. His replies were brief, distant, no warmth, no concern, no trace of the man who used to ask if I'd had lunch or tell me to take care of myself. And when I came home that evening, there he was, sitting at the kitchen table. In front of him was a yellow folder. The moment I saw it, a sense of dread rushed over me. That wasn't something you brought into a conversation between two people about to be married. That was something people brought to negotiations, to confrontations. "Sit down," Christian said. His voice was flat, not angry, not sad, just void. I sat across from him, heart pounding, holding back the wave of questions building inside me. But he didn't explain anything, just looked at me, a look so long and piercing that I had to turn away. Finally, he opened the folder and pulled out a stack of papers, thick, official. I got a paternity test. He slid the papers toward me. "Lizzie's not my daughter." I looked at him, then down at the papers. I wasn't sure I'd heard him right. No, I didn't want to believe I had. Who does that? Who gets a paternity test behind their fiancé's back without saying a word? I picked up the documents. My eyes scanned the numbers, the terms, and then the bolded line, probability of paternity, 0%. My chest tightened. "You're serious?" I asked, voice shaking. "You tested my daughter like she was evidence in a crime scene?" I knew my voice was rising, but I didn't care. I felt betrayed, not just because he doubted, but because he planned it, quietly, like I was some criminal. "My daughter," he repeated, emphasizing it, as if that meant she was no longer ours. I tried to stay calm. "She is our daughter, Christian. You were the one who held her through the night when she had a fever. You changed her diapers, rocked her to sleep, sang lullabies. You're the only father she's ever known." He leaned back, arms crossed, staring at me like he was waiting for a confession. "And the test says I'm not her father. It's 0%. So now I need you to tell me who is." I sat there frozen, not because I had something to hide, but because of how he was looking at me, speaking to me, like I was a stranger, worse, someone he no longer respected. I whispered, "I can't believe you're doing this. You're breaking everything we built, over a test." Christian shook his head, voice cold. "I'm not the one who broke it. You did. You let me live a lie for 2 years. I pushed back. "I never lied to you. I never told you for sure that you were the biological father. I didn't know. But you stayed. You walked into my life and hers willingly." He narrowed his eyes. "So you thought I might be the father, but weren't sure, and you still let me believe it?" I felt like I was walking into a trap. "I wasn't trying to deceive you. We were together around that time. I genuinely thought it was possible you were." "Possible," he repeated bitterly. "So there were others." I felt the blood drain from my face. "That happened before we were officially together, Christian. We weren't anything serious. There were no promises." "But you let me believe. Let me love her. Let me build a future on something that wasn't real." Now his voice carried disappointment, and worse, contempt. I wanted to scream. That love was real. That care was real. This family was real. But no words came, because once trust shatters, it doesn't mend easily. That night, we didn't speak another word. No more tears, no more arguments. Just a house that felt colder than I'd ever known, swallowed whole by silence. After that night, the night we sat across from each other with a distance between us that no explanation could bridge, I told myself maybe Christian just needed time. He'd come around. He'd realize he had overreacted, that things weren't as terrible as he'd convinced himself they were. After all, the wedding was just 3 weeks away. Everything had already been arranged. The venue was booked, the invitations sent, both families making travel plans, the honeymoon scheduled. Every little detail folded neatly into our shared belief that our love was strong enough to lead us into marriage. But the next morning, everything had changed. Christian was gone. Not left for work early gone, but truly, completely gone. His side of the closet was empty. The bathroom shelf, toothbrush, razor, cologne, wiped clean. And on the kitchen counter, a single folded piece of paper, written in the familiar strokes of his handwriting. "I'm leaving for a while. I need to think things through." No phone number, no address, no promise of return. I called him, straight to voicemail. I texted, no reply. I even called his office. They said he had taken personal leave. He vanished from my life as though he'd never been part of it, leaving me alone in the rubble of what had once been our shared dreams. And the most painful part wasn't even the leaving. It was having to pretend that nothing had happened. I couldn't tell my mother that Christian had secretly done a paternity test and discovered Lizzie wasn't biologically his. I couldn't explain to extended family that he'd walked out on me and my daughter just weeks before our wedding. It was all too messy, too heartbreaking, too open to judgment. So I made up another story. I told everyone he was overwhelmed by wedding stress, that he just needed some time to clear his head. My mother believed it. She said men often got strange before major life changes, nodded wisely, and told me my father had been the same way. But Jessa, my best friend, was harder to convince. She looked at me with quiet suspicion, asking questions I didn't know how to answer. "You don't know where he is? You can't reach him? And he's coming back when?" Eventually, I had no choice. I told Jessa the truth. "Wait," she said once I'd finished. "You mean Lizzie might not be his?" I could hear the doubt in her voice, a sound that made my heart clench. "Chloe, please tell me you didn't let him believe he was the father if you weren't sure." "We were together at the time," I said, trying to stay calm. "He was a possibility. I never said he was for certain, but I didn't think I needed to explain more. Things just happened." You also never said he might not be, Jessa shot back. Her voice was cooler than usual. That's a pretty big thing to leave out. I bit my lip. I hated feeling cornered, but Jessa wasn't done. Was there someone else? I mean, if you weren't sure it was Christian, then there had to be another, right? I stayed silent. She pressed on. Chloe, you have to be honest. How many? How many possibilities are we talking about? I let out a breath, and then, for the first time, I said aloud the thing even I had trouble accepting. 2, maybe 3, if I'm being completely honest. I hadn't meant to make it complicated. I wasn't trying to hide anything. I was 24, single, dating. Becoming a mother wasn't part of the plan. Everything came at me like a storm, fast and messy. Oh my God, Chloe, Jessa whispered. I didn't even need to look at her to picture her face, eyebrows drawn tight, disappointment in her eyes. You have to tell them. Those men deserve to know they might be the father. I hung up after that. My chest felt heavy. I couldn't believe my best friend was speaking to me like I was some kind of manipulator. I didn't deceive Christian. He walked into our lives on his own. He chose to love Lizzie. No one forced him. I started telling other people a different version of the story, one where Christian was the paranoid one, the controlling one, the man who destroyed a family over an emotional breakdown. Not to justify myself, but simply to survive. Then I began thinking about the potential candidates. The first was easy enough to track down. We still followed each other on social media. I messaged him, said I needed to meet. He was surprised but agreed. We met at a small cafe downtown. He looked a little nervous. "What's going on?" he asked. I looked into his eyes and said quietly, "I need to tell you something." Then I told him everything, about Christian, about the paternity test, and the possibility that he might be Lizzie's father. I tried to keep my tone even, like this was just a distant possibility. But his expression shifted immediately. Confusion turned to panic, almost disgust. "You're saying I might be the father?" The way he said father, like it was the worst burden imaginable, made something inside me sink. It really was possible. We had been together around that time. "I'm not asking for anything," I said softly. "I just thought you should know." The conversation went nowhere. He kept talking about getting a DNA test, then started rambling about custody, legal rights, responsibilities. I sat there, listening to him spiral, feeling like I was on trial, a lone defendant with no one in her corner. When I left the cafe, I felt relieved, not because anything was resolved, but because I knew I'd been right not to involve him from the beginning. 2 weeks later, the test results came in. He wasn't Lizzie's father. I called to tell him. He exhaled in relief, loudly, unapologetically. And I closed the phone, sat down, hands clenched tight, and asked myself quietly, how far will I have to go just to find the truth? After the failure with the first man, I knew I didn't have many options left. And then it was the second one's turn. He was someone I had always quietly hoped I would never have to contact again, not out of anger, but because some relationships, once they end, are best buried, like old wounds from a youth we'd rather forget, like a chapter we'd long since closed, with no desire to ever reread. We hadn't been together for long. It was something fleeting, blurry, undefined. No promises, no responsibilities when it ended. After one final argument where we both walked away without looking back, I hadn't spoken to him in over 2 years. So when I pressed his number, still saved in my phone, even though I told myself I'd never use it, my heart pounded in an unnatural rhythm. Each ring felt like it pulled me back to a former version of myself, a girl who had no idea she was about to become a mother far sooner than planned. His voice came through the line, dry, guarded. "Chloe, why are you calling me? I thought we agreed not to speak again." No greeting, no warmth, just a slammed door creaking open from rust, reluctantly. I swallowed hard, then began explaining, piece by piece, the tangled mess I was caught in: Christian, the DNA test, his sudden disappearance, and the lingering question about Lizzie's biological father. I tried to keep my tone steady, like I had with the first man, but deep down, I knew, no matter how I framed it, he wouldn't believe me entirely. After I finished, there was a long silence on his end. Then he said, with a hint of sarcasm, "Let me get this straight. You've been raising a child for over a year with a guy who thought he was the father, and now that he's gone, you're just starting to figure out who the real father is?" I bit my lip. His question wasn't wrong, but the way he said it, like I was some shameless liar, tightened something in my chest. I cut in, trying to hold my composure. "Listen, I'm not here to justify anything. I just have one question. Are you willing to take a paternity test?" Another pause. Then, finally, he sighed. "I guess, but I'm not promising anything else." I was grateful he didn't say no, but at the same time, there was something in his voice that sent a chill down my spine. No hope, no kindness, just cold, reluctant obligation, like he was doing a favor for a stranger who knocked on the wrong door. The DNA sampling took place a few days later, and just as I expected, it was stiff and painfully awkward. He showed up like it was an unwanted errand. When he walked in, he didn't look at me, and certainly not at Lizzie. She sat in my lap, calm and curious, big eyes wandering around the sterile room, completely unaware that this white-walled space held a secret that could change everything. He sat across from me, arms folded, face like stone. Every movement said it loud and clear. If he could be anywhere else, he would be. The medical staff took samples. Everything happened in silence. When it was done, he stood up, gave a small nod, like checking a box, and walked out without a word. I sat there, holding Lizzie as she rested her head on my shoulder, my heart unbearably heavy. I hadn't expected anything, but I hadn't expected to feel this empty either. The test results arrived a week later. A thick envelope was delivered to my door. Inside, the truth, printed in a language cold but conclusive. Probability of paternity, 99.99%. He was Lizzie's biological father. I stared at the paper, my hands trembling, not out of shock, but from the strange emotion rising in my chest, a new kind of fear. I was no longer the only person with authority over my daughter's future. A man who was nothing more than a faded chapter in my life now had legal rights and obligations to Lizzie. But what scared me most was he was a stranger. No bond, no tenderness. He didn't know which side Lizzie preferred to sleep on, or that she was terrified of vacuum cleaner noise. He wasn't the one who rocked her to sleep, who panicked when she had a fever, who spoon-fed her tiny bites when she refused to eat. And yet, one single document, one cold result, had bound him permanently to my life, to hers. I sat alone in our familiar living room, the late afternoon sun cutting across the curtains. Lizzie was sleeping, peaceful, innocent, as if the world beyond her crib didn't exist. I whispered to myself, I found the truth, but now what? And for the first time, I realized sometimes the truth isn't what sets you free. When I called Marcus to tell him he was Lizzie's biological father, his voice on the other end of the line made my chest tighten. So now what? He asked, cold and curt. I guess I'm supposed to learn how to be a father to a kid I don't even know. I held my breath for a moment, then answered gently, trying to maintain a fragile boundary already stretched thin. You don't have to do anything. Lizzie is fine. She's well taken care of. We've built a stable rhythm. But Marcus didn't agree. She's my daughter, he said, and something in his voice, something unfamiliar, sent a chill through me. I can't pretend she doesn't exist, not after I know the truth. Right then, I understood. This wasn't going to be as simple as I had naively hoped. Just one day after the DNA results, Marcus began texting constantly, asking about visitation, asking when he could officially meet her. He didn't hesitate, didn't need time to process. He just wanted to jump into fatherhood immediately. But I wasn't ready, and more importantly, Lizzie wasn't ready. She had no idea he even existed. You can't just show up and expect her to accept you as her father, I tried to explain during a call. She's still too young. You're a stranger in her world. Marcus replied, voice tight with anger. Well, maybe you should have thought about that before letting someone else raise my kid for over a year. Each word landed like a blow to the chest. All of this could have been avoided if you'd just been honest from the beginning. Lizzie's first meeting with Marcus was the perfect fragment of forced awkwardness. She clung to my leg, her face shy and anxious, her eyes fixed on Marcus like he was a foreign creature she wasn't sure was safe. He tried toys, treats, every trick to win her attention, but every move felt awkward and misplaced. Lizzie cried when he tried to pick her up, turned away when he called her name. When the visit ended, I nearly exhaled in relief as I walked him to the door. This isn't working, I said quietly. But Marcus had no intention of backing off. We're not waiting, he said, his tone hard as stone. I've already lost over a year with her. I'm not losing any more. And that's when the real nightmare began. Marcus started talking about lawyers. He said he'd done his research, that even though he hadn't been there from the beginning, as her biological father, he had full legal rights to her. He could file for joint custody, overnight visits, decision-making rights over every major part of raising Lizzie. Meanwhile, Christian had disappeared without a trace. No messages, no financial support, no checking in. The man who once claimed to love my daughter more than life itself had erased us from his world like we never existed. 6 months later, I found myself standing on a battlefield, alone, exhausted, and defeated. Marcus filed for joint custody, and somehow, beyond all logic, the court sided with him. I was forced to share custody of my daughter with a man who had been a complete stranger just a few months ago. The agreement broke my heart. Lizzie would spend alternating weekends with Marcus and one evening each week. They were already talking about extending it to overnight visits. I, who had been with her since her first breath, who knew her favorite lullaby, her bedtime quirks, her fear of vacuum cleaners, was being pushed to the sidelines. Each time I packed her bag and kissed her goodbye, I felt like I was being torn in two. But the most painful blow of all wasn't legal, it was emotional. Lizzie adjusted too quickly. Just a few months later, she no longer asked about Christian. She began calling Marcus Dad, as if he had always been there, as if all the memories I'd clung to of her and Christian had been erased, overwritten by a new version of father, not because of love, but because of a DNA test. Marcus genuinely treated her well, which, ironically, was something I had secretly hoped wouldn't happen. He bought her a new wardrobe to keep at his place, set up a cute bedroom with pastel walls, stuffed animals, and a nightlight shaped like a cloud. Sometimes I wondered if this was kindness or a competition, a way to prove he could be a better dad than I could be a mom. "All this isn't necessary," I said once, seeing the mini amusement park he had turned her room into. "I want her to feel comfortable here," he replied without hesitation. "This is her home too." That phrase, her home, stabbed through me. Her home was the apartment where I cradled her through feverish nights. It was the kitchen where I made porridge every morning. It was my chest where she fell asleep in those fragile early weeks. But Marcus didn't stop there. When he began dating Sarah, a woman who had everything I didn't, stability, a clean past, a solid career, a high income, I knew I was walking into a battle that had already been rigged. And then it happened. Marcus filed for extended custody, arguing he could give Lizzie a better life. This time, everything really did fall apart. Marcus's lawyer called Jessa, my best friend, to testify. I couldn't believe it. She had been working with them for weeks, quietly preparing a statement. She told me she wasn't sure who the father was, Jessa said in court, unable to look me in the eye, but she let Christian believe he was the dad because he had financial stability. I went numb, but that wasn't even the worst of it. They read aloud texts, social media posts from when I was pregnant, posts where I wrote about needing a grown-up man, someone who could secure a future. Taken out of context, those words painted me as a manipulative woman, a gold digger building an entire lie just to be taken care of. The final blow was Christian's statement. They'd found him, and he had agreed to cooperate. In his affidavit, he wrote about feeling deceived, manipulated, that he could never trust me again, that if I had just been honest from the start, maybe things would have turned out differently. When the judge granted Marcus primary custody, I nearly collapsed. I was allowed only a few days a month with my daughter, like a visitor, not a mother. I tried to stop Jessa after the hearing. "I thought we were friends." "It's because we're friends that I had to tell the truth," she replied. "Lizzie deserves a better life, better than the mess you created." Her words hit me like a knife. I was too hurt to say anything back. The transition to the new custody arrangement was a huge shock for Lizzie. She kept asking, "Mommy, when can I go home?" And all I could do was offer a sad smile and say, "Daddy's house is your home too." Marcus acted polite, courteous even, but in his eyes I could see something close to victory. And the worst part was, Lizzie was starting to adjust. She laughed freely in that new house, called a once stranger dad, clung to Sarah like she had always been part of her life. And I was slowly being pushed out of that little circle. I, who used to be her whole world, had become just a scheduled mom, someone she saw only a few days each month. And through it all, the brutal court hearings, the testimonies that left me speechless, the growing presence of Marcus in my daughter's life, Christian remained completely gone. Not a phone call, not a message, not even a single line to ask how Lizzie, the child he once promised to love forever, was doing. He never reached out to her, never offered financial help, never once stepped forward to fulfill even the smallest part of the responsibility for someone he had once called his daughter. The only thing he did was stand with Marcus in court against me. Somehow, Christian, The man who had once stayed up all night when Lizzie had a fever, the one who had cried thinking about our future as a family, became evidence used to tear me down. And then he quietly disappeared from our lives, as if we never existed. I never thought I'd reach the very edge of exhaustion, but now I understand. True loneliness is sitting in an empty room, staring into nothing, and realizing every person you once trusted has turned their back on you. I used to believe that if I lived right, loved enough, tried hard, life wouldn't be so cruel, but I was wrong. This mother who did everything she thought was right, now live each day as if I'm serving a sentence for a crime I don't even understand. They say I was dishonest. They say I manipulated people. They say I used others to build myself a secure life. But no one ever asked, back in that chaotic time when I was young, alone, clinging to the faintest hope, who among them stepped forward and said, "Let me help you"? No one. And now they stand there, pointing fingers, casting me as the villain in my own life story. Maybe I was wrong not to be clear with Christian from the start. Maybe I was wrong to believe that if someone chose to stay, then he deserved to be Lizzie's father. But I never meant to hurt anyone. I was simply trying to find a home for my child, a safe place in the storm called adulthood. I truly loved Christian. I believed he would understand. But he didn't see any of that. He only saw what he'd lost, not what I was desperately trying to protect. Now I pay the price by seeing my daughter only a few days each month, by lying awake at night, aching for the sound of her laughter, the scent of her hair, by staring at my phone, waiting for a message, even knowing it's too soon for her to remember me the way she used to. And in those long, aching silences, I ask myself, when did everything start falling apart? Did I lose Lizzie, or did the world lose its compassion? I no longer trust the system. I no longer trust my friends. I no longer trust the love that once saved me. But the one thing I still believe in is motherhood. I believe that no matter how many years pass, no matter whose arms she grows up in, someday, when her heart is big enough to understand, Lizzie will look back and see me, the mother who loved her with everything she had. I did what I thought was best. Not perfect, not by everyone's standards, but the best that I could give. I'm tired of apologizing for that. And if there's one thing I want to tell her, someday when she's old enough to understand, I loved you with all of my soul, and every choice I made, right or wrong, came from one single hope, that you would grow up in a world better than the one I knew. There are choices in life where right or wrong no longer matters. The only thing that remains is that we tried with all our hearts. I don't know if I deserve to be hurt this deeply, but what I do know is I loved, I trusted, and I chose what I believed was best for my daughter. Maybe I'm not a perfect mother, but I am the only one who stayed, even when I was pushed aside. Thank you for listening until the very end, and if this story touched something inside you, please don't forget, you are not alone. There will always be whispers of home, a place where broken pieces are allowed to speak, and maybe in a quiet moment, you'll find yourself somewhere between these whispers.